Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Raising Healthy Mothers. Today, I am excited to welcome Laura Edralin to talk about creating a calmer mind with calligraphy. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm excited about this because when I was, how old was I? Maybe like 17, I found a calligraphy set in my grandmother's like cupboard somewhere. It'd been completely untouched, still wrapped up. So I got it out. I started using it and I was like, oh, this is amazing. Because I had never been taught to use a fountain pen. Anyway, I forgot about it, all about it, until I saw you, I met you, and I was like, I remember loving calligraphy.
I love it. I
So
love
this
it.
is
There's always a story like that. I feel like it's such a common thing that people have a calligraphy set somewhere, or it was given to them, or it was passed down to. I love it. It's brilliant.
absolutely. So that's why I really was so excited to meet you and know what, learn more about what you do. So tell us about yourself and how you got into calligraphy.
So I am a mother of two young boys, and my journey into calligraphy kind of started with them. So my eldest is now 10, so about 10 years ago now. Um, I had I'd had an okay pregnancy. I mean, it was a bit of a struggle. I'd had a pretty smooth birth given the stories that I have heard. And when I had my second child, I'd gone back into full-time work. So I used to work at the Royal Albert Hall as a producer. So I used to help run, promote, deliver quite high-profile events in the main auditorium. And so I'd gone back into that role, which was long hours, high pressure. My little one was only about 5 months old when I went back to work. So it felt tough. It felt like the right decision to make, but it was a really hard one. And about 6 months into the role, I think I started to realize that I wasn't feeling so good, and I hardly saw my children, maybe caught them just as I left the house in the morning and possibly kissed them goodnight before bed. And having two little children at home, and was a struggle when you have that two different sets of hats. You've got your kind of, I'm trying to be a career woman, trying to be mum at home, trying to be a wife, trying to be all those other people that you are. And there were some really tough spiraling news stories that were kind of just starting to creep around me. And I became quite anxious and stressed about them. Things like the Manchester Arena attack, and being in another high profile venue meant that all our security measures sort of went through the roof. It was quite an intense time of training, and changes, and being alert and being on kind of switched on basically all the time. And that was really tough. And there was London Bridge attack, and then Grenfell, the tower, which caught fire, and it was around the corner from where we live, and it was just that kind of the final sort of thing for me. And I dipped into a really low patch of stress, anxiety, not really knowing who I am. And I think I've heard you talk about that feeling of once you've sort of become a mother, and there was that element and the element of trying to work out what on earth is going on in the world that I've just brought two children into. So it was a tough time with my mental health. And it was really the first time I'd understood about low mental health and what that really meant and how that really felt. I've always struggled with anxiety, and obviously we do generally deal with levels of stress day to day, week to week, month to month, and so on. But I think this was a real kind of low point for me. So I was signed off work, and in that journey of kind of understanding what supporting my mental health looked like, what coping mechanisms I had in place, and doing things like cognitive behavioral therapy, speaking to lots and lots of different people who, whether it was practitioners or friends and family, who just wanted to help and support me. One of the things that had come up was a friend saying, you know, you have this pendulum swing going of home and work, and there's a sort of third leg of the tripod slightly missing, and you're an incredibly creative person, you don't do anything creative, or you know, is that something that you'd want to do? And at the time I didn't really think that much of it. I kind of noted it in my mind and started to go, yeah, actually I don't have a thing for me, I don't have, you know, what is that? And actually that became probably more stressful than I needed it to. But there suddenly a little email pinged in my inbox, and she'd sent me a list of workshops, and one of them happened to be a calligraphy workshop, and it was about 3 months away. And I thought, great, I'll book that. I've always loved lettering and kind of writing and things like that. Kind of piqued my interest enough for me to just book it, but it wasn't something that had to happen immediately. And when I did go along to it, I really enjoyed it. And again, didn't really think anything of it in terms of, wow, this is a magical time, massive game changer. I just thought, actually, this is quite nice to do just to calm my mind down. And it turned out to be something that became a bit of a sanctuary for me. So in the evenings, I did find that kind of 2 hour slot where the children were already in bed, and I was sort of going, right, I could either sit in front of the TV and numb this pain or numb the kind of noise, or I could sit and get my nib and ink out and some paper. And then soon I discovered you don't even need the nibs and inks and, you know, things that maybe just sort of stop me from practicing on certain days. And I could just get some brush pens or even a pencil and have a go. And it gave me this sort of single focus activity that really helped me calm my mind. Piecing
There's
together.
It's such an amazing story because there's so many bits to it. I mean, there's the kind of really common theme of, oh my goodness, I'm this mum. I never get to see my children because I'm going out to work. This is pre-COVID as well, isn't it? So
Yeah, yeah.
before the kind of working from home thing, you know, thinking back on it, I don't know how families coped before working from home became like the relative norm, you know.
I don't. And I think that was always in the back of my mind, sort of like, okay, if I'm going to, you know, when we had those conversations, my husband had to give up what he was doing, sort of intentionally as well. He wanted to move into personal training. So that became a flexible working format, which allowed us to have the children going to childcare and eventually to school. But yeah, you're right. My mind is blown when I hear that people are in, you know, the mum and the dad or the parents or the carers are in full-time work
Yeah.
and haven't, you know, how do they make that work? How to, even summer
Yeah,
holidays, half terms.
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, fortunately, we've both been in a position where our jobs have changed.
Mm,
And we're able to support
yeah.
each other with that. So it's not just one feeling disconnected from that.
Yeah. And I think it is a common question as well. It's like, well, what could I do else? You know, what else could I do? This job is no longer fulfilling me, or it's causing, you know, and I think it's quite interesting as well. Like quite often what we really love doing or we're really good at or really enjoy doing pre-children suddenly becomes something quite different. It's becomes a source of stress or becomes something that doesn't feel so fulfilling compared to maybe what it did before children. And I know because I did, you know, I did this podcast special on mental health awareness week, and that was the one thing that a lot of people said was that their identity was very much about their work and what they did outside of themselves, outside of the home. And then when they had children, it suddenly became so much more about being a mother and what it meant to be in the home. And that
Mhm.
suddenly felt very like quite a tense relationship between the fact that I have to spend most of my hours outside of the home when actually my identity now is about being in the home. And I think that is such an interesting, I don't know, I suppose a lot of people have it as like a bit of a battle of like, well, who am I? Who am
Yeah,
I at home? Who am I at work? And how do I
yeah,
combine the two?
couldn't agree more. And actually, you've sort of reminded me of a part of the journey where as I was beginning to find calligraphy, I've always kind of written poetry or something here and there, but very patchy. So like mega waves of doing it and then never doing it and then back to it. And and at that time, thinking about what is it that I do? Who am I? I think a lot of that was coming out in writing, and writing short poems, and a lot of it about motherhood, and trying to work out who I was. And I actually found that I wanted to have an outlet. I wanted to build this sort of accountability where I could put this somewhere. And I started an Instagram page, and I'd actually called it the Poetry Mum. And that was my first kind of way of sharing who I was, trying to present this picture of who I was, almost more for myself than anybody else. And soon I kind of realized that although I'd called it the Poetry Mum, I think there was this element that I didn't just want to be known for being a mum. So there was that next conflict. I was sort of feeling like, oh, I want people to know I'm a mum because I'm doing all this work, I'm going off full time and I don't see my children. So there was a feeling that I wanted to fully throw myself into motherhood, and I couldn't. And then there was this feeling of sort of going, oh, but I don't just want you to know me for being a mother. I'm all these other things, but I don't quite know what they are yet. So yeah, totally relatable.
Yeah, I think you've really encapsulated everything every mother ever feels. It's like, but like, why am I so confused?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So you had a sort of poetry creative output at that point, and then it kind of moved into calligraphy when you did this workshop. So do you think it is really important to have that creative output as a mum?
Yeah. And the more I explore the reasons why, the more it makes sense to me. I think some of the people that I've been able to collaborate with, a lot of them are coaches, people who have far more knowledge around sort of the psychology behind why creativity gives us what it gives us, why it's important to have a creative output. But I think it's fascinating, this sort of idea that there's a sense of achievement, there's a sense of connection, and there's a sense of enjoyment that we get from when we do these. And that those three kind of pillars are something that I've been taught about, that are really kind of brilliant for giving us a dose and a boost, whether it's just in our minds, whether it's in our bodies, whether it's a sense of just kick-starting and triggering some of those hormones that we kind of need to bring back in. And people will get this from different places. It's not always a sort of sitting down and holding a pen and doing that. It could be a creative practice that is singing or moving or acting, or all lots of different ways, cooking, sewing, which I've recently got into. That's the only downside, is that you find that you want to do every creative practice. I say downside, it's lovely. But you also find this mindfulness, you drop into this flow state. And I think that's what became fascinating to me. So I'm holding a pencil, I'm holding a pen, I'm moving it around on paper. And actually, I'm not really thinking about anything else. I'm really focusing on the technique and the line that I'm making and creating very intentionally, and it's all in that moment. So it's sort of giving me a focus, reducing some of those sort of stressful hormones that are flying around, and kind of inviting in a bit of playfulness as well. So I think we're really hard on ourselves, especially as we get older, in terms of creativity. Um, you know, we're not born kind of not able to create. We're born very creative and very forgiving and very playful, and we can build in all sorts of ways, and make in all sorts of ways. And it's so not careless isn't the right word. It's so just for the joy of it. There's no sort of pressure to
Carefree.
it. Carefree, that's the word. Um, but it also welcomes in failure, which I think for me was a really useful thing to explore, the idea that I might be getting better at it or seeing some improvements, and then it goes wrong again, or something happens, or I, make the wrong stroke, or I'm using the wrong pen, or I've gone too big, or the spacings, and that's okay. It's all part of the creative process, and seeing it as something to surrender to rather than really kind of be in control of.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it is important to have a creative outlet
Yeah.
for all
And
those
I
things.
think and I think that is such a good metaphor for motherhood as well, of like maybe if we can accept being able to fail in other parts, in those creative parts, and realizing that it's an important bit of the creative process, that because when you so-called fail, you learn and you grow and you do it better next time, or you remember that it happened last time and you can do it differently the next time. And because again, we can be so hard on ourselves as mothers, in that, oh, I shouted at them today because they didn't get their shoes on fast enough, I'm a failure because I wasn't able to keep my temper in check, I couldn't keep calm, and all of these things. And then actually you realize that if you can fail in your creative process, it's not a failure in motherhood, because you're going to grow from it, you're going to learn from it, you're going to remember. I really like that.
Yeah, and actually, it's a two-way thing. I'm still learning calligraphy. I still say to people that I teach, this isn't it. I haven't just discovered calligraphy and, that's it, I've got it. It's a journey. You're always improving, and every single time you do it, you're picking up tiny micro bits of information. And it's also in the moment, right? So your energy, your mindset, your belief, your attention, all of those things, the lighting, your environment, the noise, everything going on is impacting what you're able to do in that moment, how you're able to create. So but what I'm also learning is that my two boys are teaching me as much as anything. They find it fascinating that I do this now as a job, and they're interested in it from a creative perspective, and how they are doing it and how I'm doing it, how they talk to themselves and how I talk to myself. There's a real kind of exchange of modeling behaviors, vice versa. It's the same both ways. I'm fascinated about if something goes wrong for them, how they respond to it, and equally how I respond to it. And I think there's a lot to learn from our children, especially in the creative sense, because they've often got much better ability to be free and be
Mm.
carefree and be playful with it.
And to get into the flow as well. I mean, I don't know about you, but when my son is playing, if it's something like Lego, or some kind of role play kind of thing that's going on in his head and no one else can see, he's really in the flow, and you can you can call his name a few times and he's like you can't hear, like he's
Yeah,
so consumed in what he's doing. And
yeah,
I watch that and realize that I so rarely do that myself.
yeah. And how nice it is when those moments do come up. So I guess for me, calligraphy invites more of that in. It's giving me a tool to kind of bring more of that flow state through. Whereas I may not have it.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think what I find really interesting since I started following you on Instagram is, I think you've got a couple of reels where you talk about going slow. And I know whenever I've tried to do anything creative, but especially anything to do with lettering, I don't go slow. I rush it. I go fast. I and then beat myself up because it's not exactly how I think it should be. And then I did take your advice and really slowed down. I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing wrong. And again, I think that's quite a good metaphor for motherhood. Generally, we're trying to rush all the time, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah. And so many metaphors throughout calligraphy as well. I mean, on the going slow point, when I did go to that first calligraphy session, that's pretty much all the teacher said to me. Like every single thing, I was like, I'm really struggling. Go slower. I'm having a bit of a go slower. And I was thinking, gosh, you're really going on about going slowly, but you know that when you do, it's actually your control's better, the pressure's better, the lines are better, everything's clearer. And I think sometimes our mind thinks that if I go really quickly, it'll happen smoother, it will create a better flow, it will give me the chance to just get it on the paper and have a look at it. But actually, it's in the process of drawing and creating those marks where we're getting all of that creative goodness. But yeah, giving people the same message, and I can feel myself going, I'm doing exactly what that teacher said to me. But it's always the thing that as soon as it clicks, not, it doesn't always work for everybody. Some people you can say it and they're like, yeah, I'll go slower. And it just, they actually can't pay attention to the speed that they're going. So I try and give people a sort of little metronome, not an actual physical one, but an idea that they might have, just be counting in their heads and how long a stroke should take and how long this should take. And then they start to go, oh, wow, it's going to take me 2 seconds to draw a line, which you could draw in 0.5 seconds. It's holding the pencil, it's being really aware of it. So all of those additional mindful kind of techniques are really, really useful. But yeah, I mean, things like that, even the transitioning from thick to thins when you're using a brush pen. I talk about transitions a lot and the momentum. So when something sort of speeds you up and noticing how fast things go with strokes, I think it's really fascinating. And lifting is another huge technique, I think, really valuable thing to kind of build into calligraphy practice, which again, if you were to find the analogy in life, it's really taking that pause and noticing and lifting and then deciding. It's that response versus reaction, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm really interested about your definition of mindful. Like, what does it mean to you to be mindful? And I guess specifically, why have you tagged on mindful to calligraphy?
So for me, being mindful is noticing and being aware of the present moment, really kind of tuning in to where you are, or being mindful of the food you're tasting or the environment that you're in. So it's a sort of, I guess it's an awareness practice with calligraphy, because you're noticing the breath, you're listening out for that possibly negative self-talk, you're looking at the ability that you do have, you're understanding the creative process. So all of that is sort of tuning into the mindful aspects, but a lot of it is really simplifying what's happening right here and right now. And one of my favorite things is telling people that, you've just written something that you'll never write again in exactly the same way. So I can have a style and calligraphers can have a style, and we could write the same thing over and over and over and over again, but there will still be tiny, tiny details, tiny inconsistencies, which means that every single time you create something by hand, it is unique in that moment that you created it. It's like a little time capsule, a little snapshot of that moment. And if you're giving that to someone, how beautiful is that? Or if you're keeping it for yourself, this is just, it's like taking a picture, but you've done it all. You've created the whole thing. So these unique kind of hand crafted things are all being made with that exact moment of how you're breathing, the energy, the sort of sensory experience, which will always be changing and always be moving. So I think that's a really mindful part of calligraphy and any art form, really, because if you're creating it by hand, there will always be something different about the way. You can't recreate it or reproduce it in exactly the same way unless you photocopy it. But it really quietens the mind for me. I think that's the other thing, is people relate to the mindfulness of calligraphy because there's a busyness in, I would say, most people's minds, but certainly from my personal experience, the just chaos of thoughts and things going 100 miles an hour and being able to just draw out of the kind of mental storm, and just come back a little bit, I think helps me massively. It is a meditative art form, so if you can slow down, if you can notice the breath, and if you can find that kind of regular, consistent practice, it can become a really lovely ritual routine,
Mm.
that can help, and certainly has helped me and lots of others.
Yeah. I think it's quite interesting because I do often talk to clients about being more present, being more mindful, and certainly try and do that with myself. And the things I've tried are things like meditation or mindfulness, kind of like mindfulness based kind of meditations. But actually, I think what I like about these kind of activities, like calligraphy or anything creative and arty, is the fact that you kind of, it's almost enforced. It's not, if you're enjoying it, presumably. If you're hating it, then you might spend the time going, oh no, I'm enjoying this. Um, but it is almost like enforced, and it's like you get into it as long as you slow down enough and kind of get into it like that. Because I think I definitely find I am very easily distracted, and I know it's a lot to do with my relationship with my phone and how easily I can quickly kind of pick it up and be transported somewhere else, and it means
Yeah.
I find it really hard to focus on a single task. But when I think about the few times when I have found a creative output, um I I don't I have been able to be a lot less distracted. I mean, that is kind of I'm really thinking back to when I was a child, really, or like a teenager,
Mm,
was when I feel like I really got into those kind of flow states. It's really like pre phones anyway. But I do think I'm so easily distracted a lot because of my phone. And kind of, I suppose, talking to you has reminded me about the fact that as a child, I did find those flow states in doing
mm,
an activity rather than trying to sit down and meditate and do these things.
mm. And my remedy for that is film yourself so that the camera's doing something and you can't look at your phone. It turns out it's a brilliant way to not look at your phone because it's in use, so you can't do anything with it. But also, I think it's probably worth me saying that I use the iPad a lot as well for my calligraphy. So for my worksheets and any digital work that I need to do, it's not about necessarily calligraphy is brilliant because it's just pen and pencil and
Mhm.
pen to paper, and there's no screens and things like that. Actually allowing yourself to be creative means you explore and are curious about how it makes you feel in all sorts of ways. And the other thing about calligraphy is that you can create it on different surfaces. And you also reminded me that we do these I do these seasonal reset sessions where you kind of go through some mindfulness practices and mindset work, but we use calligraphy. So it's not really about getting perfect calligraphy. It's not really about, I mean, that's a nice benefit to be able to be learning that, but actually we're using it to journal, we're using it to create a vision board, we're using it in ways that can be mindful projects, or even bullet journaling, things like that. So there's a sort of secondary angle to kind of calligraphy and lettering where you can actually use it as a tool for other exercises, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I tried bullet journaling a few years ago, basically because everyone just has these amazingly beautiful journals. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not so good at the lettering thing. But yeah, I feel like maybe I'd revisit that after talking to you about it. So what would you say to someone who's never tried calligraphy before and really feels like they just don't have that arty, creative spark in them?
I would say I know exactly how you feel, believe it or not. So I came from a family of artists. My parents are artists, my aunties and uncles are artists, my grandparents were artists, from sculptors to painters to ceramicists, all sorts of things. So it has been in my family and in that sort of bloodline, in the throng of growing up, it has really been around me. And I struggled with it because I didn't feel like I was doing it right ever. And I think there is a bit of a pressure when you've got professionals, you know, you're growing up in a world where they do it as a living, they do it professionally, they've gone through art school, so there's an expectation to be that good when you're 3, 4, 5. What it did give me was lots of time to kind of practice and nurture the fact that you can be creative in lots of different ways. So I was definitely fortunate in the terms of having it around me. You know, it was something that I was very aware of, but I had not got the patience for it. I hated doing things that required a lot of setup or a lot of space or a lot of tidying up. Really, really, really struggled with that, and struggled, you know, I naturally went and did it as A level, and it was the supporting work, it was my portfolio that really lacked. It was all the studying around something. I just wanted to create and move on to the next thing. Nice shiny object syndrome. But I do believe that we're all born creative. And I do think there's this little pocket between kind of self-belief and practice where we go, I'm not very good at it, so I just won't try, or I just won't do it. And I think when we live in maybe societies or families or environments where creativity is sort of nurtured out of us, and I've noticed this a lot, that we're very good at encouraging children to be creative and play with crayons and paints, and we take them to all sorts of lovely arts and crafts clubs and workshops and sessions, but we don't necessarily encourage that in ourselves. So I do think there's a bit of a disconnect between how we kind of grow out of calligraphy, and then suddenly there's this sort of very serious part of life where everything is about invoicing and life admin and pensions. And if you're not thinking about that, then you're doing something that is distracting you from all the severe kind of logistical, operational stuff. And I think that gear change means that we're sort of disconnected from the idea that calligraphy can bring us this sense of achievement, this sense of connection, this sense of joy. And I also think that everybody's actually, if you think about it on a really basic level, everybody's creating every day, all day. I know there's a difference between a kind of creative mindset and a creative practice, maybe, but I do think if you realize that when you wake up, you are stepping into your creative ability immediately, you're starting to think about what you're wearing or going to wear. You're starting to think about what you might eat and what you might cook. And you're starting to create what the day is going to be like for you. And I think when we don't pay attention to that opportunity to be creative and enjoy that process, it does become hard and monotonous, and the pendulum swing starts going. So yeah, I think even if it is a bit of movement, you know, going to the gym, what are you going to do at the gym? Do you go swimming? Do you go for a walk? Do you do any movement? I mean, I'm probably the last person to talk about exercise, but I think it's a really interesting area to explore for ourselves. Just thinking about it, if you do have children, you're actually creating all sorts of things for them every day, all day. What's their world looking like? What's their environment like? A lot of it's safety, a lot of it is, you know, the kind of absolute life, you know, important stuff that to keep them happy and alive and fed and all the very basic kind of physiological needs and things. But what about us? What's our sensory experience looking like? I would say starting with the environment, starting to think about the tools that you have. Maybe you're encouraging children to do something creative. Is that something that you can do as well? Getting comfortable with trying new things for sure.
Yeah. I really like that idea that actually life is creative, like just from the very moment of getting up and choosing what you're going to wear and what you're going to eat. I think that is a really, actually quite a hopeful kind of feeling, because I think, I mean, I definitely identify with the feeling of I'm not arty, I'm not creative. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that when I I can't create out of my own brain. Like I can't just sit down with a pen and start no like writing or drawing or painting or whatever. And so I feel like I'm not creative, but I'm very, very good at following instructions and therefore creating something that is very beautiful to look at and pleasing to look at, and it gives me a sense of joy and fulfillment in, and so what? So what if I have to follow instructions? I mean, I
Yeah,
do that when I'm cooking. I follow
I was going to
recipes. Like
say,
I
yeah, yeah, and that doesn't take away from what you've created. That shouldn't ever take away from what you've created. I think often as well, it's a springboard. So you're practicing that muscle. And often, if you probably noticed it in cooking, you've followed a recipe, you've done it a few times, perhaps you've tweaked it a little bit, so you've made it your own. Or maybe you don't even follow the recipe anymore because actually you've done it so many times that you have that freedom to move away from following the instructions and doing the kind of motion of it or being guided through it, and suddenly you're doing it yourself. So I think that's the same with creative activities. There is a sense that, well, this is a skill and I need to be really good at it and I've got to get those 10,000 hours in, otherwise it's what's the point. But actually when you're doing something to experience the benefits and see the results and maybe connect with others, or simply just doing something for yourself that isn't somebody saying, can I have something? Can you do
Mhm.
something for me? And that could be any family member. Um, but you're experiencing creativity in its rawest form, really. So if you're following a YouTube video of somebody showing you how to draw a cartoon character of something, great. I couldn't draw a horse. I couldn't draw a dog very well. I mean, maybe, but there's all sorts of things that we truly believe that we just aren't good at or won't be good at, but we haven't tried it. It's
Mm.
like saying, I won't like that food, but you haven't tasted it. Or I won't be able to do this when you haven't begun to understand how to do it in a kind of broken step. So if somebody said, right, to you, could you create something in calligraphy? You might sort of say, I don't know that that's my strong point, or, I'm not sure, I could probably do it in a different way. But actually, if you were given the steps to do it, you probably could.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there is a mindset thing. There is a feeling that, oh, well, if I haven't done it right, and I felt this when I first started doing calligraphy and people started asking me to do it for weddings, I was thinking, well, I don't know that I'm actually doing it right. I'm not sure that you want it in the way that I do it. And that was a real struggle because it was things that people wanted. So I was trying to meet their expectations because there's all these calligraphers out there doing it amazingly, and mine doesn't look like that. But is that okay? Well, yeah, actually. And people have come back to me since and said, well, I know you sent me over there to go and get something, but actually kind of like the way that you do it.
Yeah.
That's starting to build some of that self-belief.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, yeah. And actually I think that has been a bit of a light bulb moment with the cooking thing, because I love cooking. I am, and I think I'm quite good at it. And I am at that point now where I will look at a recipe and be like, yeah, yeah, but I'm going to swap this for that and I'm going to do this, and I do have a an instinct with it. Like I'll be like, well, I've got this ingredient in the fridge and I know that it goes with that, and I'm going to put this together, and I'll just check a recipe, and you know and actually, I'm very creative with my cooking. I do often still take inspiration from others, but will often do my own thing. But that's only come from years and years and years of practice and loving it in the first place.
Yeah.
But then years and years of practice, of watching others, of following others' instructions and so on, to get to the point now where I can do that off my own bat. But
Yeah.
I often have clients who come to me and say, I don't like cooking. I don't enjoy it. I've never been taught how to do it, and all of these things. Um, and so then it's like, okay, they're at that starting point, in the same way that if I were to come to you with calligraphy, I'd be at that starting point of
Yeah.
like, oh, I did it once, but I haven't done it for about 10 years. And
And that's a really vulnerable place to be. I think that's the other thing. It's knowing that actually I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm very aware of that when people come to the class or come to a workshop, or they show up and they're really nervous. They're really nervous. They often throw out as many disclaimers as possible, like my handwriting's awful, I'm really not creative, your work's cut out with me, you know, all of these things. Like, and I just think they're such hurdles, and it's hard to hear it being on the other side of knowing, well, I was there and now I can do it. But I'm so excited for them. I'm so excited because you're about to see, you're about to feel, yes, it might be difficult. Yes, it might be tricky to get certain parts of the technique. Yes, it might take a bit of practice to get comfortable. But you might just take something away with you. It might just be that slowing down piece. It
Yeah.
might just be, actually, I wasn't thinking about anything else. So it's possibly not even in the actual result of the calligraphy itself that they're going, oh, brilliant, I had a go and I'm actually quite good at it. It's not necessarily going away thinking that you're good, but you've tried it, and there was possibly a sense of calm or enjoyment, or actually that's not bad. And usually that's what people say. They're like, oh, actually, I've written this and I've written someone's name. And that's where it's exciting, because there's a little kind of anchor that sort of makes them go, oh, maybe I'll just have another go at that. And I think there is this lovely kind of momentum into, well, maybe I'll just get a brush pen and take it home, and maybe I'll just have another go at it. And actually, I think I could do that a bit better. I can see where I wasn't perfect, so I'll build on that. And so that's a really lovely thing. And that's sort of beginning of the journey.
Yeah. Amazing. I love that. I love that it is about creating that spark, and then it's going to hopefully ignite more and more um, in the future. So what are your top tips for people to get started with calligraphy?
So I would say start small, in the sense that you don't need lots of fancy equipment. If you happen to have in that drawer, in that cupboard somewhere, a brush pen or a calligraphy set, great, get it out, because it's something that you can play with. It's a tool that's unusual, and hopefully that you can go, oh, this is, you know, this is exciting. But if you've only got a biro, if you've only got a felt tip, if you've only got a pencil at home, then just beginning with some drills, some letter forms, or practicing some of these. And I've got a new workbook that's free to download called the Calming Calligraphy Workbook. So if people just want to have a little go, it doesn't need to be big. I think that's the scary thing. You see these wonderful calligraphy designs on baubles and chalkboards and window displays, and you think, gosh, that's quite a leap from where I'm feeling right now. So starting small, writing the days of the week, writing the seasons, writing a name, maybe even just beginning with the letters and getting familiar with a style, but also watching and following and seeing, being inspired by others. I think that's always been a huge part of the process for me. Oh, that makes me want to have a go at writing that word. Oh, that makes me want to have a go at writing that phrase. Oh, I like that. Maybe I'll put that on a postcard. And that sort of spark, as you say, kind of builds. And that's really exciting. I mean, top tips for actually doing calligraphy will always go back to going slower and breathing. It's incredible how easy it is to hold your breath. So noticing that you're holding your breath, and just allowing yourself to even take a few breaths before you start, or using the strokes to breathe in and breathe out. So it's a brilliant practice to kind of merge some breathing exercises as well. And just keeping up a little bit of consistency. So rather than feeling hugely overwhelmed by, okay, I'm going to download Laura's workbook, great, and then it's sat in there thinking, God, it's a workbook, now I've got to do something with it. Actually, just going through the motions, just printing it off, having a look at it. Maybe in that moment you've made a cup of tea, maybe you just have a go at it. The chances are, if you start with something that's just a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, give yourself a little bit of time so that you can go slowly. You're probably going to spend a little bit more than that, you'll probably find that you've dropped into a bit of a flow state and you'll just keep practicing. And if it's enjoyable, or if you're interested in it, kind of go, oh, this is quite nice, then keep going with it, because it's giving you that dopamine hit, that endorphin rush, that serotonin that you probably need. And if you can get it with a pencil and paper, brilliant, you know, and you can do that while the baby's sleeping, or you've got something in the oven, or between now and when the school pickups, you know, due, all those things. I think there are those little pockets of time where you can just introduce a short practice, and keeping it consistent, which is why for me, so I started the Mindful Calligraphy Club, which is an online club, but what I noticed was people were coming to a workshop, they'd come and do a 90-minute workshop, and then they'd sort of say, I'm just struggling to find the time to practice, just struggling with the idea that I need to, you know, I've just got too busy, so I'm just not going to do it, or I've just got, you know, and it's really easy to find everything else, or to end up getting swept up in everything else, or the demands of other people and the demands of life, that practice that is going to benefit you, that moment to calm your mind, that moment to just improve on something that is bringing you lots of lovely feelings, hopefully a moment to calm the mind, is sort of being missed if you're not allowing yourself just a few minutes to do it. So yeah, I think doing the club just gives people that chance to go, right, I've booked in, I'm doing this, it's a Monday night, I'm going to sit down and I know this time is for me. That practice is booked in. I don't even need to think about it. So those are my, I don't know if that is top tips in a nutshell. I think that's top tips in a waffle, but somewhere in there are some really useful ones.
No, they're really brilliant. And I think the one thing that I would also love to take away from what we've talked about is what it means to show our children as well, um, to take time for ourselves. And like my daughter, she's 2.5, and she's in that stage of saying, "Mummy, what are you doing? Mummy, what are you doing?" And it's inevitably, you know, I'm folding the washing, I'm you know, hoovering, I'm cooking, I'm always doing something for someone else. I would love to be able to say, "Oh, do you know, I'm creating."
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Yeah,
Wouldn't that be lovely? And actually, I think we feel like there's an expectation that we should be doing something that is producing an outcome that is contributing to the house, to our children, to work, to others. And actually, this is one way of doing it. You can contribute to the house, the work, the family, the others, but you're recharging yourself in order to be able to do that in a better way.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much. So you've talked about your workbook, which by the way, I feel very seen because it is still, I printed it out, but it's still sitting in my printer. But do
I
you know
knew
what? I printed it out. That's more than I've done for most things like a workbook. So it's sitting there. I know I just have to grab it, get my pen, and get a start. And I think what I really loved as well, what you said about it, you don't have to have the fancy equipment and the fancy paper and the fancy pens. You can just do it with whatever you have. And I think that's really helpful because that can be such a barrier. Well, you know, I'll do this thing, but first I need to order a pen or I need to order the paper, and you can just get started. And I think right at the top of what you said at the start with your friend saying, you know, about the pendulum and what's the third leg of the tripod that's missing, and just book that workshop because you never know what it's going to give you and where you're going to end up as well.
exactly, exactly. And I think it's, you know, sometimes when you're in that state or experiencing something that's really challenging, the last thing you want to do is take a leap of faith or do something that's totally outside of your comfort zone. But often that's the thing that's going to help you get out
Yeah.
of that feeling and move you forward and change that energy and change that mindset and help hopefully
Yeah.
bring you uh, all those lovely feelings that creativity can help with.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. So how can people find you if they want to get more involved in calligraphy?
Yeah, come and follow me. So I live on Instagram. Is my tagline. I live there pretty much most days, so you can always reach out to me on Instagram. I post quite a bit, And I'm trying to do more kind of actually just real-time videos of me creating calligraphy, so that it's just a little bit of a dose. Even if you don't want to do it yourself, you can watch somebody else, and that's pretty much, you'll probably get 90% of the benefits just watching somebody do calligraphy, because it's so
So
mesmerizing.
calming. Yeah.
So calming. So follow me at Laura Letters Life on Instagram. And then I have a website, lauraletterslife.com, where you can get free downloads. So I've got some resources on there. And if people want to join the mailing list, I send out a kind of monthly freebie where we're sort of lettering and doing some calligraphy for each month, which is just an extra, again, dose of a little nudge for people who are sort of feeling like, oh, I really want to, but I don't know where to start, or I don't know what to do, or I don't know what to write. So
Lovely. Amazing. Well, I'll put all those links in the show notes as well, so people can follow up on that. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
thank you for having me. It's been
Take
lovely.
care. Take care.
Thank you.